Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary. This is a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up and coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. And since my negative review of Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride was rather ill timed, coming hot on the heels of International Women's Day as well as the first week of Women's History Month, I felt it might be opportune to provide some salve instead of salt for any of those who are nursing some kind of wound over this being perceived as a major step back for women in commercial cinema. Look, was the failure of The Bride to capture a critical mass of praise as well as success at the box office owing to an element of reactive, implicit misogyny and sexism? I mean, sure, probably. But let's turn our losses into lessons going forward, because we gotta be real with ourselves that, I'm sorry, supporting women-led film isn't actually that hard unless you don't actually have an oppositional relationship with the framing of movies as a commodity that are only successful when they are popular or have a huge publicity push from a major distributor. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean, and I'm honestly giving you guys a peek behind the curtain here. The magician's really revealing his secrets today, because all we're going to do is go to Wikipedia and find the page for List of American Films of 2026. And now we're going to scroll down to last weekend's new releases window for March 13th, and oh, look at that, 2 new movies directed by women. Now, are you always going to have results like that? No, of course not. But if you do have a consistent interest in supporting women-led commercial film, I have good news and bad news. The good news being that it really is that simple to, at the very least, get a basic glance at new, recent, and up-and-coming film releases, find out which ones are directed and or written by women, and just, find a way to go see them. The bad news is that I can't in good conscience tell you that what you're likely to find when you look this stuff up on your own is that you're going to discover women-led films that you even want to see. Lord knows that I didn't have any particular interest in seeing Reminders of Him, an adaptation of best-selling romance author Colleen Hoover's book of the same name, co-written by Hoover and screenwriter Lauren Levin, directed by Vanessa Coswell, and starring indie scream queen Micah Monroe in a starring role that seems to finally see her breaking free from her predominant typecasting in horror, sci-fi, and thriller flicks since her breakthrough performances in It Follows and The Guest all the way back in 2014. But in your heart of hearts, what do you think is the woman-driven film that is going to suffer the most from reactive implicit bias? A big-budget major studio, style-forward, genre-bending auteur horror fantasy that just happens to be written and directed by a woman? Or, a so-called chick flick? If I'm going to go that hard at The Bride like I did last week, I gotta put my money where my mouth is, go outside of my own comfort zone, challenge my own implicit biases of not just gender representation, but also just, my basic tastes, and give a fair shot to what I was thoroughly confident was just going to be an easily digestible, pedestrian romantic drama. And in my humble opinion, Reminders of Him is an easily digestible, pedestrian romantic drama, easiest 3 out of 5 I ever gave out. No, dang it, we're going to do this. Chick flicks need appreciation too. There, I said it. A lot of you out there are just grinding your axes about The Bride because you bought into the publicity hook, line, and sinker. You arbitrarily decided it was a battleground litmus test to peddle grievance and judge the purity of other film lovers. But you same jerks wouldn't be caught dead where I was, sat right in the middle of the 3rd row from the screen, alone in a crowd full of straight couples of all ages on a Friday night to see just a pedestrian romantic drama centering on a young woman just released from prison following a stint owing to her culpability in the tragic alcohol-related death of her boyfriend, only to return in ignominy to her small Midwestern town where she accidentally becomes infatuated with her deceased boyfriend's handsome best friend, who's also an ex-Denver Broncos draftee who now co-parents her 7-year-old daughter with with the parents of her deceased boyfriend, who still harbor a toxic grudge against her for the tragic death of their son. That all might seem very silly, very predictable, and yes, of course, not terribly progressive or advancing in terms of spaces for women, both in front of and behind the camera. But isn't that the point? If we're supporting women-driven film, we have flexibility to be as critical as we want, but I'm sorry, women-driven films should not have to be progressive or game-changing or important to warrant more film enthusiasts, and I should rather say, filmmakers going outside of their comfort zone. I'm fortunate enough to have had a lot of women family members and friends and acquaintances, all of whom had a fairly diverse palette when it came to films, and many of whom would much rather see something like The Bride before ever being caught dead seeing a so-called chick flick. But at the end of the day, we have to sit with the reality that to most women, especially straight white women, a production like The Bride isn't likely to come off as a production that is made for them. Rather, it probably cratered at the box office not only due to reactive implicit bias, but because to a critical mass of girls and women, it looked like the sort of chauvinist, high-auteur fantasy stuff that more literate female audiences tend to associate with juvenile crap made for immature men for whom movies are their entire personality. Meanwhile, I don't see anybody advocating for the idea that a great place to start in terms of advancing women-driven cinema is not to continue saturating the consumer marketplace with bespoke, middle-brow art house genre flick crossovers, but maybe to apply the same kind of aesthetic showmanship and narrative boundary pushing to the so-called chick flick. The romantic literary adaptation, and the fact that you don't see a lot of advocacy for that point of view is as meaningful in terms of what opportunities that women filmmakers get to have as it is to the audience. That it is a far more demonstrative and overarching example of how reactive implicit bias holds back both women creatives in the film industry as well as women audiences from being challenged in the same way that is treated as exclusively a province of hegemonic masculinity. Is Reminders of Him an exceptionally good production? No, far from it. It's basically what you should come to expect from popular romantic literary adaptations of this kind. It's scenes of beautiful people talking bridged by montages, and even to that extent, there's a lot left to be desired in terms of Micah Monroe's central performance. She especially has this tendency in the film to overuse this kind of affected exasperation, you know what I mean? That kind of constant sighing and hemming and hawing where you can tell she's not really disappearing into her part. She's overusing those sighing affectations throughout a take instead of finding a particular motivated moment for it. So instead of there being just a particular moment where she's just like, yeah, that's the right moment for my character to illustrate their exasperation. That's realistic, that's credible, that's what this character would do in this moment. As opposed to a character who is just kind of still rehearsing the scene as she's performing it, and she's just kind of looking around, avoiding eye contact with the person she's performing with, and she's always going just like, I don't, you know... But I must say, on balance, as someone who had no familiarity with Hoover's novels at all, I haven't even seen previous adaptations of It Ends With Us and Regretting You, I did find myself feeling quite drawn into the world of cliches that were drafted here. It might be flattened and simplistic, but I genuinely do appreciate the ways in which this adaptation does its best within its limitations to explore questions of the implicit bias against women, in this case in the court system and in incarceration, especially involving cases in which they are held responsible for the death of a man, and how little sympathy there is for the idea that these same individuals might not be in the right emotional state to advocate for themselves, to not just get railroaded by the system. The depiction of Monroe's character giving birth to her child out of wedlock in prison, and because her daughter was born prematurely, she gets rushed to intensive care and she isn't even allowed to spend the 2-day recovery period bonding with her baby before it's taken away anyway. I think all of these things take what is a rather pedestrian romantic drama and grants it a real sense of friction and texture that I wouldn't be surprised if any number of men and women who typically avoid these sorts of romantic literary adaptations and chick flicks would be surprised actually does manage to elevate our sense of true dramatic gravity to the story. To maybe erode away some of our reactive, implicit biases just a bit so that we find that we, much like the characters surrounding this heroine, stop judging her and really start to sympathize with her perspective as a legitimate dramatic subject. Not just a shallow stand-in for straight white women audiences to vicariously ogle hot guys. And as far as hot guys to ogle, with someone like Tyreek Withers as Micah Monroe's romantic co-lead, it's there that you really start to see something shining through the cracks of all those flattened and simplistic chick flick cliches, and this is for the Hoover heads out there, that Reminders of Him adds just the right dash of caramel. Obviously, Withers is a very light-skinned actor to the point of being white passing for most white audiences. I'm not going to get into that. It's in-house stuff, and I'm begging my audience to understand that I'm not trying to overwrite the obviously more complex ways in which a pairing like this with a white woman lead needs to be analyzed along intersections of gender and race and colorism. But at the end of the day, Reminders of Him is a significant new film because it is a romantic literary adaptation that doesn't just settle for casting a generic himbo white guy. It's a white woman being paired with a black man. And though it's not explicitly addressed as a theme, once that white woman and the black man are finally inching closer and closer to those inevitable sequences of sensual touching and kissing and disrobing, Withers' superior dramatic performance not only brings the best out of Monroe, but also lends something even more essential to the appreciation of how our own reactive implicit biases against the potential of so-called chick flicks as part of the conversation of cinematic art underserves everybody, filmmakers or audiences, black or white, man or woman, and everybody in between. Where Reminders of Him really crests above formulaic mediocrity and earns that cromulent 3 stars is in the inevitable morning after scene when Monroe and Withers' characters have made love for the first time. Monroe's character keeps a journal in which she writes about her troubles and experiences in letters addressed to her deceased boyfriend. And what she does is end up reading to Withers' character a letter to her dead boyfriend, explicitly telling him, "Hey, so I f***ed your best friend and it was really good." It's honestly a hilariously written and well-performed moment. At least the audience I was with was cracking up, and let me be clear, I at least was not laughing at the film. I didn't find it cringe. I was absolutely lighting up that this run-of-the-mill chick flick was so bluntly and unapologetically embracing the exact sorts of implications of a scene like this, not only to its assumed white woman audience, but also implicitly to the many white men they were on dates with. That there is nothing wrong not only with a woman enjoying physical affection or pleasure, but making explicit to everyone that this is the whole point of chick flicks as a genre. That they liberate women audiences through a seemingly conventional and conservative formula of high romance and infatuation with a savior man to embrace their too often repressed knowledge that just like any straight man is entitled to live vicariously through some bachelor hero crushing it with a 10 out of 10 starlet smoke show, that every straight woman is entitled to acknowledge that there can be more than one love of your life. That even if their boyfriends or husbands cuddling them were gone, they would still be their own person, they would still have options, and that they should not feel reactive and like their egos are bruised by that knowledge. even when the implications of the scene itself can be perceived as partially emasculating, because Monroe's character is very coy. She's never honest with either her dead boyfriend or Wither's character about who was better in bed. There is a truly under-acknowledged transgressive dimension to chick flicks that reminders of him, however otherwise mundane it is as an example of the genre, exceptionalizes by taking for granted something that, like, the last time I saw a white woman paired romantically with a light-skinned black dude in a movie, it was Twisters. And the light-skinned black boyfriend gets killed to death by a tornado in the first 5 minutes, only to be replaced by fucking Glenn Powell. Meanwhile, in Reminders of Him, there's even a flashback scene in which there's a phone call between Wither's character and the still alive boyfriend, and you realize that they have given Withers, just for this scene, almost exactly the same haircut as the boyfriend, so that it's even more obvious that, yes, he literally is just a hotter, fitter, more mature, more charming, more successful, and darker version of the boyfriend. Monroe's character isn't just trading out one great guy for another guy who's just as good. She's trading up. He's literally an upgrade in every regard, and Wither's race, that dash of caramel, is represented as part of that in ways that I can't help but feel like can't be wholly accidental. There must have been some intention there. Look, is Reminders of Him groundbreaking? Is it progressive? Is it an important step in the history of women's film? No. But maybe that's the part of the conversation that we leave out of women-driven film, just as we might be inclined to do for any film driven by political minorities. Which is that the same reactive implicit biases that make it so fucking difficult to even make it through the door of the film industry if you are a woman are going to be the same ones that insist that a woman-driven film must be groundbreaking, must be progressive, must be an important step in the history of women's film just to be taken seriously, not as a shallow commodity for a narrowly pandered to minority demographic, but as a just as worthy example of film art. We need to remember that the test of good art, before any ground can be broken, any glass ceiling shattered, should be to be fine first. And if we can get more people to appreciate women-driven film for just being fine without fanfare, who knows, maybe that's more advantageous turf we could be fighting on? Anyway, with that, I'm heading out, but please join me again in just a few for the second woman-driven film release I saw last weekend. Yes, I did decide to do a double feature because that's how committed I am to supporting women-driven film, so stop fucking stroking your grievance politics over The Bride. You all are fucking annoying. But then again, I still owe you thanks then, because it was only all of those bride heads being so fucking annoying that made me do this out of pure defiance. Otherwise, please share, like, subscribe, bell, yada yada. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and this was the new movie diary. I'm gonna catch you guys next time. Oh, they were, I'm recording this on St. Patrick's Day, and then we're giving out cupcakes at work, so. Mm.